tons of new product announcements from Canon, including a new flagship EOS R mirrorless camera. Nikon and Olympus also announced new flagship camera bodies, but with lukewarm response. Why one Super Bowl photographer still shoots with a DSLR. Sony releases a software development kit to help developers make apps for their top-end cameras. And millennial wildlife photographer Jess Findlay as my selection of Photographer of the Week. So let's begin now.
Thanks so much for tuning in for another episode of Photography Radio. My name is Tomasz and today you are listening to Take's Take with Take Kayo, where he covers what's new and interesting in the world of photography, including digital, analog, mobile, and everything in between. Enjoy.
Can you imagine your life without photography? No? Then you will love this show. And it doesn't matter if you're a DSLR, a mirrorless, or a mobile phone shooter. We're here to help your photography grow. This is Photography Radio.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Take's Take, which is my take on photography news this week, so let's begin now. This week, Canon made a plethora of product announcements. Everything from an entry-level DSLR, a dye sublimation printer, a compact one, a cloud photo service, sort of, new lenses, and the one that everyone's excited about, finally, a pro-level mirrorless camera body, the EOS R5. Because of the 5 designation, this will most likely be the second from the top of the line, much like the beloved EOS 5D. So there probably still is a EOS R1 currently in development, but top secret. But this is the most professional model of mirrorless camera bodies that Canon has produced or at least announced thus far. The new EOS R5 will have all the features that Canon mirrorless shooters have been asking for and more. It will have IBIS, or in-body image stabilization, something that Canon is not known for since they usually prefer having the lens stabilized. And this is something that goes right back to the original EF lenses for their film SLRs back in the late 1990s when they started including stabilization in the lenses. This new R5 will also have 8K video capabilities. Again, something that Canon has been bottlenecking, which is video features on their DSLRs and mirrorless cameras for the past few years, and something that has irritated loyal Canon users to the point that many of them actually switched to Sony because of this orchestrated removal of video features. The final big feature, which doesn't sound that exciting, but it is for those of you that are working professionals or enthusiasts, that it has dual card slots. Something of a staple for Fujifilm's more top-end camera bodies, but again, there's something that Canon has been hesitant to include on their mirrorless camera lineup. Because this was just a development announcement of this new EOS R5 body, there are still many details left out, such as which sensor will be included on this new body. Now, because Canon still produces all of their own full-frame sensors, perhaps they're working on something really special, with rumors mentioning anything from 40 to 47 megapixels, but more important to me than megapixels would be about the autofocus capabilities. Perhaps there's a new dual pixel technology that's going to be introduced, as well as video capabilities, the frame rates, as well as a megabytes per second. I actually had a chance to review the original Canon EOS R when it first was released, and I really liked it. It had a nice refined feel to it, even though it was all new. The kit lens, the 24-105, was great. The IQ was impressive, and I knew that this was truly just the mid-level body, and that there would eventually be a 5D level body coming in the near future, although almost 2 years since the original R was released seems a bit slow for Canon's part to release this R5, but better late than never. So let's wait to see as Canon reveals more information, but by the reaction of people on their internet, it's refreshing to see a real competitor to the Sony A7 series of mirrorless cameras. Canon announced two more products that I wanted to mention. One is a compact travel printer, and the other is a cloud service, both on the opposite ends of the spectrum. The new dye sublimation printer called the Canon Selphy Square QX10. When we think about portable instant photo printers, most of us think of Fujifilm's very popular Instax printers. However, unlike Fujifilm's little compact printers, Canon's output will be a sticker and not a Polaroid-like photo print. Much like Fujifilm's photo printers though, the printer works via an app that allows you to create collages, add text and graphics, and each of the cartridges will hold up to 20 stickers at a time. As for image size, the Selphy can create 68 by 68 millimeter images, which is slightly larger than Fujifilm's Instax Square's 62 by 62 millimeter image area. It's a nice compact size and a good-looking printer, and the fact that the printout is high-quality laminated dye sublimation printouts is actually good news, but can Canon crack Fujifilm's Instax printer dominance? At $150 US for the printer and a 20-pack of stickers costing only $15, the new Selphy system is significantly cheaper than Fujifilm's Instax Square printer and prints, but I think the key will be the software experience. The Instax software is very slick and enjoyable to use, so let's hope Canon will update their Selphy app to appeal to their target market for this product, which if you look at their promo video, it will be females as well as those who are into arts and crafts, although for me, I would love to have one of these printers. Another announcement is that Canon is yet again getting back into the cloud storage business, sort of. Well, maybe we're thinking this is a very, very competitive field with companies like Google, Amazon, Apple, Dropbox, and Flickr competing for this marketplace. However, Canon does have a plan. First of all, Canon is claiming this isn't a typical cloud-like service. In fact, they will be working with Google, Flickr, Adobe, and other companies to integrate their services in with Canon's. On the Image.Canon website, they have 6 icons to give a brief explanation of what this service provides. First, the first icon they show is it's the initial camera to cloud seamless upload, they claim. Then number 2, it's the original photos will stay in the cloud for 30 days. You can also download these images to any device. You can auto-forward these images to Google Drive or Flickr within the 30-day period to keep the full resolution images. They offer a long-term cloud service for up to 10 gigabytes. And finally, you can share the images to the cloud or on the cloud to various social media platforms. Those are the 6 little features that they showcase on that website. So basically, this cloud service is more like a hub where your images can reside temporarily, and it acts as a backup. But when you can move these images to existing services that you already have, which is great. So it's not like Canon is trying to compete with Google, iCloud, or Flickr. For Canon shooters, I think this is a really good option for a second backup tool, especially if you already have Google Drive or Flickr or any other cloud service they may add in the near future. This also points to a new future where camera manufacturers stick to doing what they do best and leave specific products like cloud storage to the experts, but facilitate their transfer process by making it seamless from camera to cloud. It's also great to see Canon diversifying their product offerings, although I think it's a matter of survival, really. Camera sales will continue to drop before it plateaus, so manufacturers need to fill gaps in their product lineup where there's growth. And I think that portable printers and cloud/hub services is definitely an area of market growth. Both Nikon and Olympus also announced their latest flagship cameras. Nikon announced quite quietly, in fact, their brand new D6. At $6,500, this is a very specific camera built for professional sports, wildlife, and action, much like the recently announced Canon EOS 1DX Mark III. However, unlike the Canon that added features that many were looking for, Nikon has disappointed many who were anticipating a new D-series camera that would compete with the Canon for the upcoming Tokyo Summer Olympics this year. Looking just at the spec sheet, it's pretty disappointing considering there isn't a S or a Mark II model of the previously very popular D5. Now, I won't go through all the specs, but I think the core of the problem isn't that the body is basically the same as the previous model, since Canon's flagship is also very similar to the previous model, but the fact that it's basically the same sensor and the same basic features, and often in case has less features. Many were hoping for IBIS or in-body image stabilization, higher continuous frame rates, better video features, but none of these features came to fruition. I think the biggest problem is the lack of R&D resources, since Nikon has been, to their credit, really focused on their new mirrorless Z cameras in both APS-C and full frame. They have great bodies, great lenses, and an overall decent ecosystem considering they just started making mirrorless cameras. With all this attention to mirrorless, however, and with Nikon shrinking market share and profit margins, it's clear that Nikon engineers were no longer focusing on building a killer new D-series cameras. They don't have the time, resources, or the energy to do so. I think this is, in a way, more of a marketing blunder than anything else. Instead of calling it the D6, it should have been called the D5S and call it a day, similar to what Sony did with the A9 Mark II. They added some small updates and features, and so added the Mark II to reflect this minimal upgrade, transparent and honest when naming the camera. So the new D6 is still a good camera, but for a $6,500 flagship, and seeing what the direct competitor recently released, and 4 years since its last update, let's just say that this new D5S, we'll call it that, is a very disappointing launch for a flagship. Moving on to Olympus and their new flagship, the OMD EM1 Mark III, it suffers the same disappointment from their users, since the specs are very similar to the previous model, and like the D6, the new EM1 uses the same sensor from the previous model, the now ancient 20 megapixel Micro Four Thirds sensor. Now, I've always liked the OMD ecosystem since they lived up to what they were selling, a high-performance, well-built mirrorless camera in a compact size. If you look at the EM1 and some of their pro lenses like the 40-150 f2.8, which is an 80-300 millimeter equivalent, or the 300 f4 with the 1.4 times teleconverter, which gives you a 840 millimeter equivalent, you're getting a very high-performing camera in a very compact size compared to a full-frame camera equivalent. Especially if you're hiking or you want something really light but a serious camera, the Olympus Micro Four Thirds system makes a lot of sense. The problem is the same as Nikon, which is their resources are stretched. Since Olympus relies on someone else to develop the sensor for their cameras, and at this time it looks like even Panasonic has decided to move up to full-frame mirrorless and sort of leave Micro Four Thirds for very niche cameras, there's no incentive to build a higher performing Micro Four Thirds sensor, which is unfortunate. In addition to the old sensor, the EVF and LCD are also about 2 generations behind, and even though it has dual card slots, only one of them is the ultra high-speed Type 2. What the EM1 does have going for it is class-leading IBIS, 7.5 stops of image stabilization, which is still the best of the pack, and they have great build quality of the cameras as well as the lenses, but without more resources to keep up with the other competing platforms such as Fujifilm's X series, I think Olympus and their Micro Four Thirds systems might be on its last generation. Moreover, both Olympus and Nikon's lack of sales and thus resources are really starting to show with the release of both of their so-called flagship cameras, and this does not bode well for the future of these lines and perhaps even the future of their camera divisions. There's a really interesting article and interview on Petapixel with Getty Images' chief sports photographer Robert Carr in his recent assignment photographing the latest Super Bowl event. We talk a lot about gear, but it's always good to talk to the actual end user of these flagship cameras and find out how and why they use these powerful photographic tools. Now, for the Super Bowl, Carr used 2 brand new Canon EOS 1DX Mark IIIs, 1DX Mark II, And for lenses, a 400 f2.8, a 70 to 200 f2.8, and a 24 to 70 f2.8. And he said basically this is what he used all season. Nothing out of the ordinary for him as a sports photographer. In the article, he explains not only how he gets the shots, but the value of getting top-end images for sports in comparison to the smartphone image that seems to dominate other genres of photography. Now, this is a quote from him. He says, "If you look at a lot of the players' Instagram today, you're not going to see many photos taken with iPhones. You're going to see a lot of them taken with real cameras. And while it's fine for the average fan to snap a picture from the stands or a family member to do a group picture on the field, to get that in-your-face action picture, you still need people to know what they're doing. That's a part of the job that a lot of people forget. You still need images people want to use not just 30 seconds after taking it and it goes away in a story, but ones they're going to want to keep around for a long time." End of quote. Carr also goes into the Sony versus Canon debate and why he prefers Canon. And oddly enough, the reason wasn't technical, but something that many amateurs and enthusiasts might not think about, but often debate about for hours and hours about features and technicalities. And he comments on basically why he chose Canon over Sony. And this is again a quote from him. He says, "To be brutally honest, I have used the Sonys. I had one for a couple of months that I tried out. It's a fine hammer, but to me, with what I do, with my specific role and what I cover, I much prefer the Canon. It works better for me. The feel, the balance of the lenses with the body, to be quite honest with you, the way my hands are, the way the Sonys feel in my hand, it's just not a good fit." Again, end of quote. Now, in the end, it was the familiarity with the ecosystem as well as the ergonomic feel in the hands that convinced this top sports photographer to stick with Canon and not switch over to Sony. Maybe we can all learn something from this top sports photographer about not chasing specs and numbers, but focusing on our own personal workflow and what works best for us. Sony is doing something that I've wanted more camera manufacturers to do for a very long time, which is open up their camera firmware to third-party developers to help create unique software that works in conjunction with the OEM UI and firmware. The SDK, or Software Development Kit, will give developers access to control the top-end Sony cameras remotely using Windows-based software. Sony's Deputy President of Imaging Products and Solutions Americas, Neil Morowitz, explains. He says, quote, "Companies will now be able to custom develop applications to control our cameras remotely, allowing them to take full advantage of the many innovations in Sony's lineup, including industry-leading autofocus, shooting speeds, and much more. Ultimately, this gives professional clients the ability to create new and different imaging experiences unlike anything that's been done before." End of quote. Available now, the Camera Remote SDK will only support the A7R Mark IV and the A9 Mark II bodies, but Sony explains that this kit will gradually be expanded to include more cameras. I think this has a lot to do with the upcoming Tokyo Olympics, which is a good thing. My hope is that Sony and other manufacturers like Canon will expand their developers kit to include not only Windows, which means the remote app will be tied to be used through a laptop or desktop, but really expand it to include iOS and Android, because I think much of the software innovation is happening within the mobile software world. I remember years ago hacking my little Canon point and shoot because it gave me access to information like shutter count and XF data that the OEM UI wouldn't give me. And I've always wondered why these things were hidden from users. I'm happy that finally camera manufacturers are opening up their cameras to third-party developers, but I want more than just remote camera access. I want to be able to create new folders, rename folders, pull specific files out of the camera, perhaps even customizing how the menus look, all remotely from a mobile device. Allowing users to customize or hack their cameras to make it unique to the user is one great way to integrate standalone cameras into a photographer's entire workflow, including camera adjustment, remote control, image ingestion, and customization. For this week, my selection for featured photographer is Jess Findlay. A prolific and award-winning wildlife and nature photographer, Jess Findlay calls Vancouver home, a perfect place to focus on the great outdoors. Jess was born in 1992, so he's quite young, but if you met him in person, which I have, he looks even younger. And you may mistake him for just a kid starting out in photography, but don't let his handsome young looks fool you. Jess is a very well-traveled, experienced, and talented photographer. If you check out his Instagram feed, you can see that he has traveled all over North and South America, photographing some of the most rare and exotic animals, with his specialty on photographing birds. One of my favorite images he's taken recently is of a barn owl flying out of an old abandoned barn. It looks like a magazine or an album cover and has all the elements of a well-conceived and constructed commercial shoot, but is completely out in the wild, and it was up to Jess to adapt to the natural surroundings to make the shot happen, something that Jess is very good at creating if you look at his feed. Now, this image is posted to Instagram as well as his blog under Top Images of 2019, and I'll leave the link in the show notes for Instagram, but on many of his images, he shares generously on how he gets his photographs as well as all the equipment he uses. Now, you might have already guessed, because he's a professional wildlife photographer, his gear of choice is Canon DSLRs and lenses, of course. But you'll see in his write-ups that you need more than just a camera and a lens to get the type of images that he's able to create. Jess's beautiful photographs have been showcased at various museums throughout North America, including a show and presentation at the prestigious Smithsonian Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. I also leave a link in the show notes to a recent podcast he did with the CBC, where he talks us through one of his award-winning photographs curated by the Natural History Museum in London of a loon out in the wild. As a photographer who doesn't photograph wildlife, it's still interesting to understand his process. So follow Jess on Instagram at Jess Findlay, which is spelled JessFindlay, and his website at jessfindlay.com. But again, I'll leave all the links in the show notes. Again, thanks for joining me for episode number 7 for 2020 on Take's Take, which is my take on photography news this week. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know how you're enjoying my format in covering photography news, and if there's something you'd want to hear, perhaps an expansion of Photography of the Week, or more news coverage in an area I've perhaps missed. So leave a message at photographyradio.com/take, which is spelled take, but not pronounced that way. Again, leave a message at photographyradio.com/take. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll talk to you all next week. And until then, happy shooting.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. Hit subscribe on your podcast app. It would mean a lot for us to have you as our regular listener. Head over to photographyradio.com to drop your suggestion for future editions of Photography Radio, or simply to say hello. We would absolutely love to hear from you. In the meantime, have a wonderful night, and we will be back with more photography in your ears very soon.